Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Julie Mulvihill, and I'm the Executive Director of Humanities Kansas. And welcome to the Big Idea. We are launching our fall season today, and we are so glad that you are here with us. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Big Idea, it's a monthly online program that highlights and inspires fresh thinking in the humanities. And today you are not going to be disappointed. So this fall, we are kicking off our Big Idea series that's really exploring the theme of museums as storytellers and how we think about who gets to tell our stories or who has the responsibility to tell our stories in some ways too. Now, as a reminder, each Big Idea begins with some sort of written essay or an article or an interview, and we share that around, and that really forms the basis of our conversation. And we'll put that in the chat box if you haven't had a chance to read that yet. We hope that you'll read it. We'll hope that you take the comments and conversation that happened today and take it back with you to your friends and family the next time you go for a long walk or have lunch or dinner together and say, I heard this big idea that I want to share with you. We'd like to spark those conversations. So we welcome your questions for our guests. You can engage with one another through the chat box. You can put your questions in the chat box. You can put your questions in the Q&A. We'll find them. So please be sure to interact as much as you'd like. And now I'd like to introduce the host of today's program, Dr. Valerie Mendoza. Valerie is a Topeka native, and she received her PhD in history from the University of California, Berkeley. She works in the public humanities sphere. You're familiar with her, I'm sure. She's done a lot of work with Humanities Kansas, but she's worked with the Kansas Historical Society, the Kansas Arts Commission, and others throughout the National Folklife Network. So Valerie, Dr. Mendoza, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Julie. And it's great to be here, kicking off another season of The Big Idea with my wonderful guests. So I would like to introduce Jancita Warrington, Executive Director of the Kansas Native American Affairs Commission, and Travis Campbell, Director of the Haskell Cultural Center and Museum. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll just get started talking a little bit about the big idea. This big idea talks about the importance of local museums partnering with tribes to tell the stories of Native Americans in their communities. What suggestions do you all have to start this building of relationships?
The best advice I can give you is to reach out to the tribal communities, not just the ones that are contemporarily in your area, but historically in your area. Reach out to these tribal nations, figure out how they want their stories told, what stories they want told, and how they want them told. They will be your number one point of contact, and they will tell you who to talk to and who not to talk to, and what to tell and what not to tell. That is respecting cultural privacy, that is respecting their knowledge that they have and their rightful place to tell their own histories.
Yeah, I really like how you bring it up, not just the tribes that are there now, but the historical tribes that were there, in the past that might have been removed I think that's really important as well as this aspect of there are things that we don't want told, right? That we don't want shared.
I would also add that it's important to look at this aspect as a partnership. Sometimes it's we go in and we collect these stories, and then as a curator, it's our job to interpret that and then tell the story. But in particular, with tribal culture and tribal storytelling, there is no interpretive way for that story to be told. There's one way, and that's the historically accurate way, but also from the cultural perspective is the only way that it should be told. And so just going back to partnering with the tribes is essential in understanding that they're an equitable partner in this, but that really they're gonna kind of lead that narrative of that story. And they should have a lot of oversight to make sure that it is accurately being portrayed, whether it's a digital storytelling or whether it's in an exhibit. Um, Also essential to that relationship and any relationship that we have, you're a new neighbor coming into a community and um, you start by talking to your neighbors, you start by talking to the tribes, you establish a relationship, you listen, you engage, you listen some more, you observe, you listen some more. And through that, there's trust that needs to be built in order for a partnership to form. And particularly when we are the stewards of the storytelling of history, as museums are, that's a crucial aspect that really needs to have a lot of strength is that trust and that partnership. And so I would just encourage those that are looking to partner with tribes to understand that this is not going to just be like a one time we go in and have a meeting, and this is a very linear relationship where we have three objectives, and after this 1 hour meeting, we're going to come away being able to do these three things. That's not quite the way it works, and there's a lot of real-time relationship building and communication that needs to occur before that trust is gained, and that is true really for any type of historical relationship building.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up, this notion of a need for partnerships and trust. Because as you were talking, I also was thinking, we do want that partnership because we don't want this to be a one way, a relationship that's extractive, right? And Native Americans have a, a, a right to be wary, right, of institutional spaces that historically have not, treated them well and with that respect. Yeah. What suggestions, as you were talking, I was also thinking, what suggestions might you all have for making these museums, these institutional spaces welcoming to the Native Americans, right? So say, I have this exhibit, we worked on a partnership, and but I want the community to come to a space where maybe they haven't come before. How can museums work on being that welcoming space as well?
I think a huge aspect of that is, like Jancita said, establishing that reciprocal relationship with the tribal nations, being there, being respectful, listening. Another aspect that I've seen that makes a huge difference is the language that you use. Do not refer to tribal nations as if they are entities that exist solely in the past. Native people are here now, present, doing the same things as anybody else, going to school, going to work, going to the grocery store, whatever. Native people do that too. So don't just keep us in that historical context because it's so limiting and dehumanizing.
And another thing, and just going back to that relationship building and that partnership, as we sit down and we take the time to actively communicate and engage with a tribal community, we learn a lot about that tribal community. And there's very unique perspectives and worldviews that the tribe have that probably aren't found that much in American society. And so from there, you will learn about what is respectful protocol to this tribal community. Now, there's 574 federally recognized tribes. So what one tribal community considers respectful protocol does not mean that that's what the other 573 tribes think is respectful protocol. And so as we go back and we learn about these communities, again, we really learn about the way that they see the world, the way that they view different things, and the way that we can be respectful and be a good partner in these ways. And so from learning about that, whether it's, you know, in museums, we call it having a reception, but the tribes might have some kind of a welcoming feed or something in that nature. Now, I know it's not allowed in the museums, but we can always modify those things and have something outside of there. But some type of offering in that way to invite them in and thank them for sharing those parts of their history for sharing those stories because they are very vital to their identities as well. So they're sharing a piece of themselves and their communities as they share this history. And so it's always respectful of us to recognize that. And again, I'm sure that as we take the time to meet with these communities, then again, it'll open up our eyes to a lot of the things that they feel are respectful.
Thank you guys. So when you think about the traditional narrative of Kansas history as it's popularly told, what's left out from an Indigenous perspective, or put another way, what stories do you wish were told in museums?
I wish that there was more information from the tribal perspective about pre-settlement contact. You know, the trade routes that were established between the nations that were here in this area, just that kind of thing. What was going on beforehand? It wasn't just people just living their lives, but how were they living their lives? What were they doing? What was their life like? What was a a year like? What was a month like? What was a day like for the tribal people living in this environment in this area at that point in time pre white contact? I think that would be phenomenal to see that included. And the realization that it's not going to be the same for, let's say, the cause as it was for the Pawnees. It's going to be different. And I would like to see those different stories recognized and given the proper respect that they deserve.
I was going to answer similar to Travis. A lot of what we know about Kansas history really starts at the state's inception as a state into the Union, but there was thousands of years of history that existed before that time, before Kansas was even known as Kansas. And so learning a little bit about what was happening at the time as the United States was first forming, there were tribes all throughout the continent from north to south, east to west here in what became the United States, but the government didn't realize that. So they started in the east and they thought that there was just a few tribes. And so they had this idea of removal that they were going and they actually enacted a federal policy, a removal policy in which they were going to round up all the tribes in the east and remove them to the west of the Mississippi into a location that they called Indian Territory, which today is modern Kansas and Oklahoma. That was this large melting pot where they were going to take all of these tribes that they rounded up and put them there. But as they started coming west towards the Mississippi, there was just more tribes and more tribes and more tribes. But they did still remove tribes. One of the famous removals is the Cherokee Trail of Tears. That's just one of the many stories of removal. But as they got to this northern part of this Indian Territory, which is modern day Kansas, there was over 24 tribes that were in this particular area historically before Kansas became the state we know today. And so, unbeknownst to them, this era of bleeding Kansas then started and became intensified. And so the federal government rounded up all of those tribes again and removed them into the southern part of that Indian Territory, which is modern day Oklahoma. That's why you have 36 tribes that exist in the state of Oklahoma today. And so but very rarely do we even understand that that is part of the history here in Kansas. And there was a lot of sacrifices by other cultures and nations of people to make way for those Kansans that eventually settled and for our very capital to be established on Indian lands. And so just kind of understanding a little bit more about that part of history, but not just from a historical perspective of somebody that studied a history, but to actually have those people be able to tell their own histories up until that point is vital. But it also, when we tell any history from a firsthand perspective, it creates the opportunity for that history to come alive and really resonate with people. And so I rarely see that particular part of history um, uh, recognized, I guess, in modern day exhibits. And so I think that there's a little bit broader of a thought process that we could have in museums and figure out how we can incorporate some of that earlier history, because it does set the foundation for what Kansas became today and then who we are today. So it connects the past, the present, and the future.
Yeah, I love that because you guys bring up such great points. This idea that, hey, you know what? Teach us that Native Americans were here before we became a state. We just didn't appear out of suddenly appear. And then bringing that into, the larger context. So, for example, I'm from Topeka, and then the tribe that I know most about is the Potawatomi. But it wasn't until, I was much older that I actually knew that they were removed here from somewhere else, right? And so, yeah, telling those stories, is being super important to, just that larger context. Yeah, so thank you so much for that. Um, so you've both worked at the Haskell Cultural Center and Museum. So let me ask you, why do you think it's important to have museums dedicated solely to Native American history and culture and administered by those who are Indigenous?
Simple answer that comes immediately to mind is it's important because there is so much history and so many cultures that we need the space for representation. We need the space to tell the stories and share the histories and put into the spotlight to just everybody that these tribal nations still exist. We're still here. We're still connected to these histories and these people and these historical figures that we need to be able to have a place to share this with everybody, anyone who's interested. And for Native people to administer and manage these museums in the day-to-day context, it's the simplest way I can think of that I've explained this to people is, how would you feel if someone came in and wrote your family, your story, your personal life story, and did not ask you, did not include you, did not bother to find out the story from your side, from your family side, from where you're coming from? That is, you're doing a huge disservice to both the people whose stories you're telling as well as to the visitors and people that are there to learn by not telling these stories accurately.
And in some perspectives, I'm sure that these historians really did the best that they could. These anthropologists at an early time when they went in before tribal people spoke English solely, when they spoke their own tribal languages, but still these anthropologists and others that went in to study these cultures of people early on and documented that and wrote series of books about this. Um, that's often misrepresented interpretation of tribal history and what was actually going on. But because it was a perspective from outside the culture, they didn't really understand what was going on. They just did their best to observe and then document. And so, again, now today, if it's not from a tribal perspective, oftentimes it is misrepresented, if it's even represented at all. So for the tribes to have the ability to be able to have their own cultural centers in their own space where they tell these stories, because all of the things that you find in cultural centers are intertwined into Indigenous history, into Indigenous identity, because it's a living culture of people. And it's very important that it's administered by these Indigenous communities or these Native peoples themselves, because they actually live this history. They have lived it, they continue to live it. And so it's not something that they've studied and then they're and put on a shelf to interpret later on, which is sometimes the um clash and I guess worldviews in between the museums, societies, and Indigenous peoples, and why Indigenous peoples think that museums haven't cared for their things properly is because our stuff wasn't meant to sit idle on a shelf. It was meant to be used and to continue to document our particular parts of history. Um, and so for us to have the ability to do that today really not only helps to correct that history, but it helps to give an accurate representation of who we were, who we are, and where we're going in the future. And that helps people to understand that Indigenous people are very much alive and our culture is very much thriving today.
Well, and it was such as you both have mentioned, an oral tradition, right? Before, you know,
Yeah.
so that's kind of when we do get that written history. The first written history we get is through the white perspective, as you were mentioning. And I'm asking you guys this. Uh, you mentioned what who would you recommend from a native perspective to read for somebody who might want to get some background in history? And I know this question's coming off the cuff, so I'll give you a sec to think about it.
That's a
Well,
huge one.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a very broad category, because it's like, do you like, does the reader, are they interested in contemporary history? Are they interested in historical history? Are they interested in the art? Or are they interested in a humanities based kind of area? Um, there's so many different areas to pick from, I guess, to say just like one author or one kind of story that would encompass all of it really isn't fair to the author, or to suggest one of those things without realizing like what is the intended audience for this. Are they younger children? Are they school age teachers? Um, and if there is school age teachers, there are certain lists, if you do Google them, that like the National Indian Education Association and others put out book lists of authors and books that they do recommend for public school teachers to use, that they vetted and they are accurate and they are culturally respectful. So that's just one example of a particular subject matter that might be explored by authors.
Thank you. Travis, did you want to add?
No, I think that summed it up beautifully. Jancita, what you were saying brought to mind the controversy that I saw on Facebook a couple days ago about the book Empire of the Summer Moon about the Comanche Nation. And one of my friends was saying that they were present when the research was being conducted for this book, and apparently the author did not consult with any Comanche people. So you really have to watch these books and these authors, and like Jancita said, find a vetted source to go through to find these books. I've been working on a recommended reading list for our website for books about Haskell, and I have to say it's rough because you have to find the authors that have done the research in just in our little area here, just in Haskell, to find people who've actually been here, people who've actually been on site to see Haskell, not somebody who's sitting in an office halfway across the country writing about somewhere they've never been, somewhere they don't know, something they've never experienced.
Or even that at Haskell, there's things that have been written about Haskell, but they're based on government reports. And those government reports were from the very perspective of, let's say, just quite frankly, the colonizer at the time that was trying to um, reform Indian people with the overall goal to make them something that they were not and to shape them into something that they wanted them to be, which was quote unquote a civilized member of society. While history can tell you that tribal peoples were very highly civilized for thousands of years before the United States came. So it's whose story or whose perspective is being told in these things. And again, like Travis said, we really need to be aware and at least question at the time that we do read something from not just Indigenous cultures, but from any cultures. Um, is this an outside perspective, or was this culture actually consulted with, and have they endorsed it? Because to say that they've consulted, sometimes our idea of consultation is not the same. Sometimes people will visit it one time, but never consult with any people there, but they consider that consultation. And so we just really need to consider some of those things when we consider the authenticity of what's in those books. Now they might have 3 PhDs behind their name, and so we just automatically assume that they are a well qualified expert. But in this particular area, especially in tribal culture, it does take that extra layer of partnership to be included.
Yeah, thank you. So we have a question from our audience on this topic. So oftentimes it seems like the only Indigenous artifacts in museums are archaeological finds, while other people are portrayed with more contemporary object stories, photographs. What first step could museums take to change this?
Well, let's say that a museum, if maybe there's a museum director out there that looks at their collection and realizes that they do have just very historical type of artifacts in their collection, but they would like to in the future have a exhibit that tells the whole story of Indigenous people. So they have this beginning and historical part, but they don't have a contemporary part. Well, contemporary art of Native peoples is alive and well out there in society. And so we could think about as museum directors, or if we sit on boards of particular museums, probably doing a capital campaign or something to allocate funds to be able to go out and purchase some of these items to add to our collection so that they do accurately represent this whole story of Indigenous peoples there. And so that's a standard that museums continue to collect whatever their mission statement supports. And that's how their collection continues to grow. But sometimes we don't think about that it as native art or as native artifacts and things because we think of that culture as something of in the past. And like Travis has said several times, and I very well share with people this culture is a living culture of people. It always has been. There's been government policies that have attempted to create this genocide of our culture, but it luckily did not work. And our culture is alive and has always been. And so for us to think about that in this way and to be able to acquire those things, there's a great art show, one of the more widely attended and well-known, called the Santa Fe Indian Art Market. And so if there's anybody listening out there that is not aware of this, if you just Google it, you're able to go in and see more about that and to learn more about that. And if it is something that you're thinking about collecting contemporary art of Native peoples, this would be an amazing event for your museum staff or your foundation board or whoever it is to attend and just be able to look at the unique perspective of contemporary art that's available there today, as well as meet all of the artists.
Great. Thank you for that. So we have another question from the audience, and I'm going to turn to you. In the big idea, Travis shared that it's okay to ask questions. When reaching out to Native tribes. Would you share a few questions that you think should be asked by non-Native museum leaders who want to change or update the way they tell their local historical Indigenous stories?
I would have them go to the tribe in their exhibit and explain to them what they've already done, how they've been telling the story, and address what the tribe feels needs to be changed about how they're doing it. What does the tribe feel is the best way for their story to be told? How would they like to tell their story? What how would they be comfortable? I always think about audiovisual components, things like that. Why would the tribe be willing to have someone share an oral history from the tribe that could be incorporated as part of the exhibit? So how would the tribe like to tell their story? How would they like their voice to be heard? I think that's your number one most important question.
And when we reach out to these tribes, like anything else, if you don't know anything about the tribe, I would suggest just do a simple Google search. Almost every tribe has a website, a modern day website. Within there, there's tabs that are easily identifiable and easy to navigate. And a lot of tribes do have a cultural preservation, a historic preservation type of department, as well as some tribes do have their own cultural centers and museums. And so I would suggest reaching out to one of those departments to try to establish that relationship. And you should be able to find that contact information by a simple Google search.
Thank you. So, other than the Haskell Museum and Cultural Center, which you've both worked at, and if you haven't been, you should go. But before you go, or if you can't get there, you can also go to their website, which is amazing, and they have some online exhibits. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Jancita's short film on Haskell that's on YouTube. Um, well, before I ask my question, why don't I just let you guys talk about, your work?
The work in the museums today.
Yeah, well, like what's going on at Haskell, and then maybe Jancita, if you want to talk about the film and other works that you might have done. Um,
Absolutely. Since we reopened last June, a huge push, it's been a very intentional huge push over here, has been to update how we're telling the story, how we're sharing Haskell's history, how we're making things more accessible to visitors and to Haskell students and to alumni and to our faculty and staff. That has been kind of the guiding principle behind everything that we've been doing over the last year and 3 months is to just modernize how we're doing things. This is our first year functioning as part of the appropriated budget for the university. So we don't have the financial constraints that we had in the past to limit us in our abilities to tell these stories and tell them well. We always told them well, but we were limited by our money situation. And fortunately now that's not a problem. So we've been able to modernize and incorporate a lot of audiovisual elements, a lot of let's see, I'm working on a video tour right now to accompany the main floor exhibit on Haskell's history. I've already incorporated a text reader for visitors who are visually impaired, because physical limitations should not be a barrier to history and to information and to knowledge. So that's kind of been what we've been doing here.
And yes, the film Keeping Legends Alive just documents a very important and celebratory part of Haskell's history, which was the uh, opening of the Haskell Stadium and also the first Tribal World War One memorial, that is the entrance to the stadium. Both of those things were very important parts of American history that have often been overlooked, and many people within the own community of Lawrence and outside of there don't really realize how historically important and representative that particular stadium is to the history of tribal peoples across the country. In the 1920s, Haskell had one of the most successful football teams in the entire country. They weren't even a recognized high school till 1927. And so they were playing college teams, though you're talking about like the big time Brown and the United States Marines at Yankee Stadium, very big, well-known football programs at the time. And Haskell was the complete underdog, but was able to compete at that level. But outside of sports, and the more important part of why that particular part of history is um, so important to know is that for the first times in history, this is in the early 1920s, much of what the American public knew about tribal peoples was solely based on government reports that were released to the public. And so to experience Native peoples, and at that time in the contemporary aspect, not the ones that were riding horses, not the ones that were wearing feathers in their hair, that in the 1920s was a very realistic perception within people's lifetimes of what they remember. But to actually see them out on a football field playing in a very contemporary American sport, stunned a lot of people. And for them to see that Indians could do just the same things that any other American person could do was very eye-opening, because it was the first time, and in my perspective, the first humanities-based interactions that the American public actually had with American Indian people at that time. And so it introduced this idea that we weren't nostalgic, we weren't a remnant of the past, that we are very much present in modern day society. And so that story is just very, very important, as well as what we now know is that tribal peoples, through tribal code talking, helped to win World War One for the United States government. This was a very well-known secret and highly classified until the 1970s. And so but it's something that history lived within our tribal stories, within our tribal communities. It was a well-known fact. Um, but when our soldiers came back from war that served alongside of other American soldiers, we weren't even recognized as United States citizens until 1924. And so to have the stadium represent that historic contribution to American history, by memorializing those soldiers that did serve in World War One, was a very, very important, because nobody else was going to do that for us. We were able to do that for ourselves. We told that story, and it was tribal peoples that raised the $250,000 that it took to build that stadium. Today, that equates to over $8 million in modern day monetary contributions. And so again, it does show there is parts of history that show that we've always told our story. We were always able to tell our story, and we were able to tell it well. So that film just gives a glimpse into that history.
And thank you so much, you guys, for all that you do. We have a couple of questions. So, first, Kansas is steeped in frontier history, right? The doctrine of discovery, pre-territorial settlement by white settlers, forts, broken policies. It gets complicated really quickly. So, can you all recommend museums or other resources that handle these complicated relationships in ways that are expansive?
I think the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. does a really good job of taking things um, like incorporating parts of historical, maybe politically based things, policies and things and times, but being able to incorporate them into museum exhibits that tell a story and that explain certain parts, but don't dwell on that particular part of history. But it's important as to the evolution of what happened later in time. And so I would have to think if there's a few others that I could recommend, but I think that NMAI does an excellent job.
I would recommend the First Americans Museum in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, as well as the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I think they're both phenomenal museums, and for the same reasons Jancita has said. And the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center in particular, because they incorporate the food. You can go and eat traditional Pueblo food at their little restaurant there. They have dancers come and perform. It's a really neat experience. It's beautifully done.
So you that's one of my favorite museums as well. You don't just get to experience the text from a secondhand perspective, and they do have a lot of interactive type museum exhibits, but you actually get to have a firsthand experience with the culture, with the food, with other things there. And they do it very well in that there's seven different bands of Pueblos that are represented in the overall structure of the Pueblo people. So that is representative of all seven of those bands that came together to form this amazing museum. And it is one of my favorites in the country as well.
I went there for the first time in June, so I shall second that. One last question, and then I think I'll turn it back over to Julie. So, really quickly, any recommendation on resources to help museums figure out which tribal nations to reach out to, given the long and complex history of Native peoples in what is now the state of Kansas, with many tribes here before European colonization, and also a number of tribes removed and many removed again out of Kansas? The question of which tribes occupied a particular area at different points in time can take some research, right? So, are there any good resources, maps, books, websites that either of you would recommend that documents what tribes lived where and when in what is now Kansas?
I would start with the Kansas Historical Society and reach out to them and see what materials they have in their archival holdings as far as maps and documentation would go. I think that's going to be a solid place to get started.
Um, yes, I don't know one just website or something which is a resource for all of those different things. Um, if a museum director ever does have a question about a particular area or a particular time period, you can always reach out to the Kansas Office of Native American Affairs, and I can help to get you that information. If you have a very specific question, I work and sit on several education committees that are working to develop a resource like this actively, but we don't have just one site that lists all of these different resources and time periods and things. But we do have access to different maps and other partners at universities that we're working with here in the state. And so I'd be happy to help to find you that information if you have some specific questions or need to reach out to any of the tribes here in the state. I can help to provide you some names and contact information for whatever it is you're inquiring about.
Thank you so much for your time and just it was a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you both. So I'll hand it back over to Julie.
Wow, thank you so much. I did not come prepared. My sticky notes are filled with notes. I needed an actual tablet. And so thank you to all three of you for such an engaging conversation. And, it was both informative, but also really inspirational about all the opportunities that we have in front of us for really this sort of shared expansive thinking about how all of this connects together. And that just really gives me a sense of excitement. And I hope it provides something similar to everybody who was able to join us today. So thank you for that. Now, the Big Idea monthly programming returns in October. So, those of you who are interested in continuing this conversation, but with a slightly different lens, we hope you'll come back. It's October 11th at noon, and the topic will be African American storytelling in museums. And our guests will be Denise Sherman and Brittany Beck, who Denise is the director of the Kansas African American Museum in Wichita, and Brittany is the curator there. And then Dr. Carmela Williams, who is with the Midwest Black Archives, will also be on that call with Valerie. So for those of you who can make it, we hope you can join us. And I hope that those of you who have more questions for Jancita and Travis will follow up. And let's really make a difference in our state with sort of rethinking how we share these stories. So thanks to everyone. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next month.